In an ideal world, I would be filming this video from behind the wheel of a car. I would be doing a POV drive showing you the differences between driving here in the Netherlands and driving back home in the United States of America. But unfortunately, that is not possible for two reasons. For one, I don't have a Dutch driver's license, so I can't drive here. And even if I did have a Dutch driver's license, I don't have a car here in the Netherlands. So we're going to have to settle for the next best thing, which is walking and talking and just showing you the best that I can, the things that I'm talking about while I walk. That said, driving in the Netherlands is completely different than driving back home in the United States of America. Now you might be wondering, well Jordan, if you don't have your driver's license, how do you know that? Well, I know that because I've driven a lot back home and I've been driven a fair amount here in the Netherlands. So I do have enough of a reference point to be able to make these distinctions. That said, the first reason why driving in the Netherlands is completely different than driving in the US is because of the cars. Now, I'm not going to go too in depth about this because I actually plan on making a whole separate video about the differences between Dutch cars and American cars, because there are quite a few very big differences. That said, I do want to touch on 2 points about Dutch cars. The first is that Dutch cars are manual. Dutch cars, by and large, are manual, whereas most cars back home are automatic. As a matter of fact, I don't think I know anybody who is not a definitive car enthusiast back home who drives a manual car. The only people I know who drive manual cars are car enthusiasts. Here, it is literally the standard. It is the norm. Everyone that I've seen driving here, or at least every car that I've been in here, has been a manual. Whereas back home, again, automatic is the norm. Now, aside from that, the cars here tend to be a lot smaller. They tend to be a lot smaller, and this does two things. This has two net effects on the experience of driving here. For one, when you're driving a smaller car, you have to be more mindful. What do I mean by that? You have to be more mindful because if you crash in, let's say for example, a Ford Fiesta or a Toyota Aygo, you're probably not going to survive. And when you combine that with the fact that the cars are manual, you have to pay more attention anyways because driving requires more effort on your behalf. Now, aside from that, smaller cars allow for the infrastructure to be a lot different here. And that's really the essence of what makes driving in the Netherlands much different than driving back home, is the infrastructure. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, for starters, the roads here are a lot smaller. So you can see right here, this is kind of a typical Dutch road. Sometimes they're made of asphalt, sometimes they're made of brick, but generally speaking, this is about the size that most Dutch roads will be. And this road seems like it's a fair size, but if you were to try to drive a lifted Ford F-250 on a road like this, you would have problems. You would probably have a lot of issues with making it fit, especially with other traffic driving on this same road. It'd be very, very difficult. And believe it or not, the roads can get much, much smaller than this. This road right here in Texas would be small. Even the roads in my neighborhood growing up were much larger than this, or at least noticeably larger than this road right here. But in the Netherlands, again, there's really no need to have these really large roads because the cars are very small. Or maybe it's a matter of induced demand. Maybe they simply make the road smaller so that people are less inclined to get larger cars. Chicken or the egg, doesn't really matter. They both exist and they both have a great influence on your experience on the road here in the Netherlands. Now, because the roads are smaller and because the cars are smaller, a lot of times the roads here are much easier to maintain because, for one, there's less wear on the roads because the cars are smaller, and also people are incentivized to drive smaller cars because you have to pay road tax according to the weight of your car. So that's just another way that they disincentivize people from getting those lifted Ford F-250s that weigh thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds. But I digress. Because the cars are smaller, they put less wear on the roads, and because the roads are smaller, whenever there is wear on the roads, they cost less to maintain. And I think Not Just Bikes actually made a video about how a lot of these American suburbs with these really excessively large roads are actually Ponzi schemes. So you can go and check out that video if you want a more detailed explanation of this. But basically, the point that I'm making is, with smaller roads, they're going to be easier and cheaper to maintain, which means that the roads will be better maintained. So if you'll notice, you don't really see any potholes or anything like that. As a matter of fact, I've been told by a few people that there isn't even a direct translation for the word potholes in Dutch. So if that doesn't tell you anything about the quality of Dutch roads, then I don't know what will. But it's definitely fair to say that the roads here are substantially better. Substantially better. In fact, that's probably the first thing that I noticed even before I landed. Just from the plane, as we were landing or descending toward Schiphol Airport. I hope that I said that right, and I hope you can hear me because it's kind of windy out here today. But I digress. As we were descending toward the airport in Amsterdam, I noticed that the roads seemed really, really nice. And once my girlfriend's family picked me up from the airport and we were driving back to Brabant from Amsterdam, that was pretty much the first observation I made, was wow, these roads are really, really nice. So that's definitely a major benefit of driving here in the Netherlands. I mean, this right here, you can see there's a little bit of a crack here. That's probably the worst you'll see here in the Netherlands. Maybe there are parts of the Netherlands where the roads are worse, but the parts that I've personally seen, and not driven on, but been in a car on, I've yet to see any substantial potholes. Because back home, listen, when I tell you the roads back home are close to third world country roads in some places, I am not exaggerating. I'm not exaggerating. A lot of places, honestly, they'd probably be better off just having dirt roads or gravel roads instead of having the sorry excuse for paved roads that they have in some cities. But also, just a little side note, again, you can see some of the roads are asphalt, some of them are brick. Either way, they're both much, much better than the roads you see back home. Much better. Now, the next big difference between Dutch roads and American roads, and I don't have a direct example right now, but hopefully somewhere throughout this video I'll be able to show you this firsthand, is that I've noticed that here there aren't as many traffic lights. Instead of traffic lights, there are roundabouts. There are a lot more roundabouts. And even at four-way intersections, like you can see up here, there are very few stop signs. So we can go ahead and bundle both of those into one big difference, one major difference, is that there are very few stop signs, very few traffic lights. So again, this is a four-way intersection, so you might be wondering, well, if there are no stop signs or a few stop signs, how do people know who goes first? Well, it's my understanding that here, the person on the right always has the right of way. So if you get to an intersection at the same time, the person on the right side has the right of way. And this honestly makes it a lot simpler to handle those four-way intersections, even as a cyclist, because I know that if somebody's coming from the right, I just let them go first. And it's simple. Back home, if you get to the stop sign at the same time, you're gonna have to do that weird thing where you both kind of go out and then you stop, and then you both wave at each other to say, oh no, you can go. It can get a little confusing and annoying. So I do think that the system here is a lot better in that regard. And then as far as the traffic lights versus roundabouts, this is very, very different, in my opinion, in terms of how it affects the flow of traffic. Now listen, I'm not an urban planner. I don't really know the specifics of how these things work. But what I do know with 100% certainty is that there is definitely not nearly as much traffic here as there was back home. I mean, not even close. And I do believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, of course, but I do believe that that is a big part of the reason why that is the case, is because roundabouts generally don't really require you to stop unless there are cars there. Whereas back home, a lot of the lights, a lot of the traffic lights that is, are timed. They're on a timer, meaning that you basically can get to the light, be the only car at the intersection, and have to wait. And sometimes that can hold up traffic and create this sort of ripple effect that causes a traffic jam. And let me actually go back this way. I think this is where I came from earlier, but maybe we'll see a roundabout somewhere in this neighborhood. I don't know. But when you have roundabouts, you don't have to stop unless there is a car there. And this seems to really enhance the flow of traffic and sort of prevent traffic from accumulating in general. And I think that is a big part of the reason why. Again, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sure there are other factors that I'm not taking into account, but just generally speaking, I imagine that that's a big part of the reason why there aren't a whole lot of traffic jams here. Now, another difference that I've noticed between driving here in the Netherlands and driving back home in the US is that the speed limits here are not only lower, but they actually vary. And what I mean by that is, of course, back home, it's not like everywhere has the same speed limit. But here in the Netherlands, I've seen something that I never saw back home. Literally anywhere, ever in the US. And that is variable speed limits. As a matter of fact, I think I came from this direction earlier, so let's go this way. But what do I mean by variable speed limits? Basically, here in the Netherlands, on the highways in particular, the speed limit changes depending on the time of day. And this actually leads me to another thing, but a lot of times, instead of seeing a sign, an actual physical sign on the side of the road that indicates the speed limit, you'll see more of a digital sign, and the number that the digital sign displays will change depending on what time it is. Or even on the physical signs, it'll say from this time to this time, this is the speed limit, and then from this time to this time, this is the speed limit. And that right there is very fascinating to me, because back home, I mean, when I would drive, I sort of knew the road so well that I didn't even have to consciously pay attention to the speed that I was driving, because I knew the speed. It was muscle memory, and I would just naturally go at the speed I needed to go without thinking about it. But here, I'd imagine that just that one factor alone would require you to put a lot more conscious thought and attention into driving. And that probably, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but that probably plays into the lower accident and traffic fatality rates here. But again, I could be wrong, but I'm sure that at least plays somewhat of a factor. The variable speed limits, that's something that is very, very interesting to me. And honestly, I think it's pretty nice. I think it's pretty nice simply, oh, there's a cat right there. See if I can coax him into coming over here. But I think it's very nice because, again, if it's late at night, there's no reason for the speed limit to be 60 miles per hour, or I guess 80 kilometers an hour. Come on. He's not going for it. But here, they take that into account. They take the flow of traffic into account when creating these variable speed limits. So basically, everything here is more fluid. Back home, I feel like it was a lot more rigid in terms of the rules. And because of the rigidity and the lack of fluidity, people were more apt to break them. When the rules don't adapt to the situation, people adapt to the situation by breaking the rules. And so I think that's a big part of the reason why people here, aside from just the overall collectivist mentality that permeates pretty much every aspect of Dutch culture that I've observed, at least, I think that that's a big part of the reason why people here tend to follow the traffic laws a lot more when driving, is because the rules accommodate them rather than them having to accommodate the rules, if that makes sense. Now, on the topic of Dutch drivers, the next big difference between driving in the Netherlands and driving back home is the drivers here are a lot better. The drivers here are a lot better. Now, listen, I'm not trying to bash American drivers or anything like that, because I'm one of them. I have my American driver's license, and so I know how easy it was to get. That American driver's license is not worth the plastic it's printed on. I'm going to be completely honest with you. It is not really indicative of the quality of your driving ability. And I know this because the day that I got my license, I was 16 years old. I remember this very, very vividly. October 2016, got my driver's license. The first thing I did was I went to my friend's house. I picked him up. We went to the park to play basketball. And on the way to the park, I ran over the curb. It wasn't like there was a very tight space that I had to fit my car through or anything like that. I literally just ran over the curb because my depth perception and my spatial awareness was so bad. And that's something that it kind of took me at least a few months of driving alone to fully get a grasp on. And although I haven't been in any traffic accidents or received any traffic tickets, I've only been pulled over once and got a warning, I definitely wasn't a very good driver when I first got my license. And I think that that is actually pretty common amongst Americans because the license is so easy to get. My girlfriend had to take the driving test probably 3 or 4 times before she passed. And the way she described the test was that the test takes, I think, 30 minutes to an hour of driving. So just that right there, I already knew, just based on the time frame, that it was much more extensive than the American driver's test, because my driver's test was 10 to 15 minutes at most. We drove down the street. They had me do a 3-point turn. They had me reverse down the street. They had me parallel park 1 time, and that was it. And I got my license. Again, not very extensive. I guess they were more so counting on the driver's school to have you fully prepared. So they just assumed that if you had done the practice, if you had done the work, then you would be good at driving. But really, even when I look back at driving school, a lot of it was just driving with your parents and filling out this little timesheet where you log the hours that you drove with your parents. And that would be very easy for someone to just, well, forge their parent signature or something of that nature. So I think a lot of people back home really don't know how to drive that well. And of course, it could be a lot worse. I know that in some of these third world countries, for example, I mean, you can't even be a pedestrian on the street and expect to not get hit. But back home, I will say that as a pedestrian, as a cyclist, and as a driver, I definitely felt like I was much more in danger because the general lack of awareness amongst drivers was much more apparent. And that actually leads me into the next point about Dutch drivers, which is that not only are they generally better, but they're more conscientious of cyclists and pedestrians. And I always wondered why this was the case. How are they so much more aware of pedestrians and cyclists? Because back home, there have been situations where I had the right of way as a pedestrian or cyclist, and I still almost got hit because they just weren't paying attention. And there have been times here where I would see my girlfriend confidently cut right in front of a car, especially at those roundabouts, because if you're Dutch, then you kind of know what I'm talking about when I say that you have the roundabout and then you have the cycling lane, the bike lane that goes around the roundabout on the outer edge. And when you're cycling, the cars are supposed to concede the right of way to you as a cyclist. So they're supposed to stop and let you go in front of them. And then once you pass in front of them, they can enter the roundabout and go on about their business. I've seen my girl cut in front of cars with no hesitation at all. And for the first probably 6 or 7 months of being here, it scared the absolute shit out of me. It used to scare me so much because I was like, what are you doing? I would actually get mad at her. I would get mad at her. I would stop my bike, and then whenever the car would pass, I would go, and then I'd catch up to her. I'd be like, what are you doing? You're gonna get hit. But I didn't understand at that time that it's just a different dynamic. It's a different situation. I'm not in America anymore. I am not in the US anymore. So that's not to say that people aren't getting hit out here, because I know 2 people specifically who got hit while riding their scooters. But at the same time, your odds of getting hit here are much, much lower, whether you're in a car, walking, or on a bike. And a big part of the reason why this is because most Dutch drivers have also been cyclists. If you grew up in the Netherlands, you grew up riding a bicycle. I don't think there's anybody here who's physically able to ride a bicycle, grew up in the Netherlands, who doesn't know how to ride a bicycle. Because according to my girlfriend, you actually take cycling classes when you're in elementary school, which we definitely did not have. I'm saying this to say that as a former cyclist, or even a part-time cyclist, you have a lot more empathy and compassion for cyclists when you're in a car, because you know what it's like to be them, because you have been them before. And I think that this definitely plays into the overall awareness and conscientiousness of drivers when it comes to interacting with cyclists and pedestrians here in the Netherlands.